info. She is talking about ghosts hanging around what some say is a real-life haunted house in Metro Detroit.
Haunted houses pop up all over the place this time of year.
A new Wall Street Journal report profiles the many parents who think they can see ghosts, specters, and mysterious movements on their advanced baby monitors.
Baby crib.
I freaked out. I stopped what I was doing and I ran upstairs and I grabbed my daughter.
Heather says this so-called ghost scratched her daughter Lily and attacked her too.
You are tuned in to the Ghost Signal. Hello and good morning or evening wherever you are across the 24 time zones, and welcome to the Ghost Signal. If this is your first time here, thanks for finding me, and if you are returning, welcome back. My name is Jeff, and I will be your control operator for this episode of the Ghost Signal. This is episode 6, The Trespasser, in which we will examine the ex-murder house of Waleska, Iowa, and the history that surrounds it, followed by a graveyard shift segment about an overnight stay in the house, written by yours truly. A quick note, if you have a true ghost story for the Graveyard Shift segment, or Twisted Tale of Terror for the Light in the Attic Patreon segment, please send it to the Ghost Signal Podcast at gmail.com or visit theghostsignalpodcast.com. If I read it on the show and you include a mailing address with your submission, I will send you a Ghost Signal sticker, a 3 a.m. sticker, maybe some business cards too. Spread the word. It is time to officially introduce the Ghost Signal Patreon. There is a $1 tier called the Spirit tier, where you can listen to episodes ad-free on the same day as the regular episode releases. And there is a $5 tier called the Spectre tier, in which you also gain access to ad-free versions of the episodes, but also a Light in the Attic where I narrate creepypastas from all across the internet, and a short video where you can take a peek behind the curtain of the Ghost Signal. Are you a spirit or a specter? Choose the tier that's right for you. Anyway, on to content. This story can get pretty intense, so listener discretion is advised. The scene of one of the most gruesome unsolved mysteries in the history of the state of Iowa has led to a bucket list location for thrill seekers, weekend warriors, and ghost hunters alike from all across the globe. And we are going to dive in headfirst, dear listener. So lock the doors and windows, check all the closets, basements, and attics, and under all the beds, because you never know if there's someone hiding in your house. And maybe they're just waiting for the perfect time to spring their trap. Prepare for dead air.
Dead air.
Sitting at the intersection of Highways 31 and 71 in rural southwest Iowa, about an hour east of Omaha, is a small farming community of about 1,300 people named Waleska. A day here is the same as any day in every small town across America. The day starts around 5 a.m. and the sidewalks roll up at about 8 or 9 at night. Nothing unusual really ever happens here. There was an F2 tornado that touched down about 6 miles outside of town in 1999, and besides a speeding ticket or the occasional teenager getting busted for drinking or smoking the devil's lettuce, there is virtually no crime to speak of, and it's almost been this way since the town was founded way back in 1858. Almost. In the early morning hours of June 10, 1912, 8 people, a family of 6 and 2 visitors, were brutally murdered by parties unknown in a house that has since come to be known colloquially as the Waleska ex-murder house. The address is 508 East 2nd Street, not to be confused with 508 North 2nd Street, which, as we learned in Episode 5, is the Sally House. It was built in 1868 and purchased in 1903 by a very well-respected local farm implement salesman, Josiah Moore. He moved himself in along with his wife Sarah, and children Herman, Mary, Arthur, and Paul. They lived here peacefully for 9 years. In June of 1912, the town of Villisca found itself at odds with its own power district over a dispute over the price of electricity, and the night of the 9th was overcast, giving the town a feeling of being back in the Old West. It would have been quite easy for someone to sneak around and not get caught. Mary Moore had two of her church friends, Lena and Ina Mae Stillinger, stay over that night as children do. They all got home from a church function at about 9:45 to 10 p.m. that night and were never seen alive again. At some point between then and the morning of the 10th, all 8 people in the house were viciously attacked by an unknown person or persons with an axe. It was determined that the first 2 to die were the parents, Joe and Sarah Moore. The killer then went to the adjacent bedroom and murdered all 4 of the helpless sleeping children. The walls and ceilings were damaged in the attacks, bearing gouge marks from the upswing of the axe, some of which still remain. They then proceeded to descend to the first floor where the 2 Stillinger girls slept, who met the same fate as the Moore family. Lena seems to be the only one who woke up during the attacks, as she was the only victim to possess defensive wounds on her arms. All victims were killed with the blunt side of the axe except Joe Moore, for reasons no one will ever know. The killer then cleaned themselves up in the kitchen, cooked up some tasty bacon for breakfast, and bounced on out of there, never to be seen or heard from again. I have to say that there is a striking similarity here with the DeFeo murders of Amityville, New York, where if someone was sleeping in the same quiet room, in the same quiet house, the sound of someone mere feet away from you getting bludgeoned to death by a homicidal maniac, the upswing taking chunks out of the walls, that should have woken somebody up. The next morning, Mary Peckham, the next-door neighbor, was out doing her morning chores when she noticed an odd stillness. The Moores, who were always buzzing around by then, were eerily silent. She had decided to go next door and check up on them, and found the front door locked. Nobody locked their door in 1912 rural Iowa. She knocked soundly on the front door but got no response. Sensing something was very wrong, she left to get Ross Moore, Joe's brother, who she knew had a key to the house. When they got in the house, they checked the blue room where Lena and Ina were sleeping. They saw 2 lumps under the sheets, one arm sticking out of the side with blood trailing down and dripping off the fingertip. Horrified, they called in J. Clark Cooper, a local physician, and Marshal Henry Horton to the scene. When they lifted up the blanket, they found the bodies of Lena and Ina mutilated beyond recognition. Marshal Horton later testified that he went through the whole house and found a corpse in every bed. They then noticed that all of the mirrors in the house had been covered. The oil lamps were placed at the ends of the beds, and all the windows had their curtains drawn except for 2 that didn't have curtains, so they ransacked the parents' dressers to find something to cover them. The kitchen table held a plate of partially eaten food and a bowl of bloody water. The axe itself had been partially cleaned and left in the blue bedroom. Next to the axe was an uncooked slab of bacon. The list of suspects immediately began to take shape. Most notably was a man known as Englishman Reverend Kelly. He was at the same church function as the Moores the night of the 9th, and had caught an early morning train before the bodies had even been discovered. He even returned to Villisca 2 weeks later, pretending to be an investigator with Scotland Yard. In 1917, at his trial, Reverend Kelly confessed twice to the murders and was still acquitted, after he was found to be legally insane and recanted his confessions. He stated that the night of the murders he had insomnia, so he walked to the Presbyterian church where he sat in silence until he heard a voice in his head telling him to go further. So he went outside and walked to the end of the street, where he saw an axe in someone's yard, which in 1912 was not unusual. He picked the axe up and heard the strange voice again, telling him to slay utterly, which he did. News of this atrocity reached all across the nation and beyond. Fingerprint evidence was still in its infancy, and the axe itself was thoroughly clean, removing all traces and forever destroying the only solid lead investigators would ever have. Even after Reverend Kelly's confessions, other suspects were tracked down and cleared, and with no solid physical evidence, all leads went cold and the case remains unsolved to this day. The house itself sat vacant for years until it was purchased by Darwin and Martha Lynn, who now lease it one night at a time to anyone brave enough to put their money where their mouth is. Some say that the spirits of the children are still there, not really aware of the fact that they've passed on, and can be seen playing with the toys that are still scattered around the house. Some others say the spirit of the killer can be communicated with, bringing a disjointed psychopathic energy with it. Still others have encountered something far darker. There is a theory that places that have been witness to unspeakable crimes retain that energy and can attract inhuman spirits. Those are the bad ones. It's been blamed for cutting many overnight investigations short. There have been many television shows over the years that have filmed episodes in the house, Ghost Adventures, Kindred Spirits, and The Dead Files being probably the most famous. There have been dozens of books published, most trying to figure out who the killer was. There are a few that focus on the paranormal instead. There have been other podcasts that have told this story, Scared to Death and Haunted Roads to name a couple, and all have gone to great lengths to tell the story as accurately as they can. But there is one constant when dealing with the house in Villisca, and that constant is Johnny Hauser, the caretaker and the keeper of the house's unabridged story. He lives next door in the same house Mary Peckham lived in all those years ago, and has seen more activity in that house than anyone. Footsteps, doors that close by themselves, strange lights, disembodied voices, and even the sound of an axe being dragged across the floor. He has conducted over 400 investigations in the house, but several years ago stopped when it got too close to home. Whenever he would be in the Moore house, activity at his own house would spike, terrorizing his own family, so he decided to stop investigating there. He had also become aware of the fact, as most seasoned investigators do, that the spirits are just people, and having different groups come in every night waving a bunch of equipment around could be seen as disrespectful. Other people get to pack up and go home. The Moore house is right at his doorstep. As far as the haunting itself is concerned, he's got an overwhelming amount of evidence gathered, trying to find some pattern to the activity. Anniversaries, birthdays, even severe weather and eclipses have no bearing on the level of activity in the house. It seems to be completely random. One night will be calm and peaceful. The next will see people scared out of their minds, running for their cars, and there's no way to predict it. Johnny also has a theory about who the killer actually was, and his theory is most likely the correct one as far as I'm concerned. He calls this theory the man from the train. In the early 1900s, trains were the only form of transportation uniting the country, and many vagrants took to riding the rails to live a life free of rent and mortgage, and to easily evade detection. One such railway cuts right through the south end of town. In 1902, a string of murders began all the way across the Midwest to the east and west coasts. The MO was always the same. An axe found on the property was the only weapon used. The doors were always locked, and he even covered the mirrors and windows at each location. The sad reality is that we will never know the identity of this person. If you ever find yourself driving through Iowa off the beaten path a bit and wind up near Villisca, stop by for a quick day tour and don't forget to bring your phone in with you. You might just catch a child-sized shadow peeking at you from the staircase. Many paranormal teams have investigated the house throughout the years, capturing evidence spanning the spectrum from tear-jerking when EVPs reveal a child's voice saying, "He's coming for us, Paul," to absolutely terrifying when a shadow man dragging an axe behind him can be seen stalking about. And the story doesn't end there. Time for the graveyard shift. In the summer of 2012, local media here in Omaha were running stories about the 100th anniversary of the Villisca axe murders. I had friends who stayed in the house overnight recently, and I thought it would be a great idea to give it a shot. I'd always wanted to give paranormal investigating a try, just to see if what I experienced in my childhood was real or just my imagination. I talked to a few friends to see if they were interested in doing an overnight in the house, and they all, to my amazement, said yes. So after some careful planning, we set the date at November 21st, 2014. As the day drew closer, I got more excited. Do I need to buy more equipment? What do I even need? The nervous energy was very real. When you book an overnight stay there, the owner's wife will call you 2 weeks ahead of time to confirm your reservation. But that same morning, the ex-murder house was in the news again, but not for a retrospective. A man named Robert Larson Jr. had leased the house that night, along with his 2 elderly parents. Long story short, he was in the house alone while his parents were in the car so he could perform an experiment, one that went horribly wrong. He was life-flighted to Omaha's Creighton University with a stab wound just beneath his right shoulder blade, in a way that would have been impossible for him to do it himself. It was all over the news, and Miss Lynn asked me that morning if I had heard about their little incident, and would refund my deposit if I so wished. I told her there was no way in hell we were going to back out now. The day finally arrived. Mike Collins and I left Omaha the afternoon of November 21st to make the hour-and-a-half drive to Villisca, and got there just as the sun was setting. We met Johnny Hauser, paid our fee, and as everyone else started arriving, Johnny gave us a short but informative tour of the house and left us to our own devices. The 8 of us spent the first half of the night simply chit-chatting in the living room, telling ghost stories to each other while the cold autumn winds howled outside. When we did start investigating, we found the house to be eerily quiet. Mike got some strange static on his EVP recorder while sitting alone in the attic, and his wife captured a strange green light anomaly on her cell phone camera in the blue bedroom, but nothing conclusive. In the morning, we all headed home, a bit disappointed, but happy that I got to spend a fun night in a spooky old house with some of my closest friends. But I forgot one very important aspect of ghost hunting. When you leave the venue, you have to tell whatever's there to stay there, or you run the risk of something following you home. And I didn't. The activity at my house started almost immediately. My living room TV began turning itself on and off. The living room lamp would randomly flicker, and bookshelf decorations began throwing themselves to the floor. I would hear voices coming from empty rooms and hallways, taps on my shoulder as I sat working at my computer from unseen hands. I even saw a strange streak of white light that was in 3D space shoot out of a wall in the basement laundry room. I now live in a little one-bedroom apartment, and I'm pretty sure it's still hanging around. Lights still flicker, the strings on my guitars pluck themselves, and little fingers tap on the back of my computer chair from time to time. It's even mimicked my own voice when I was recording episode 2, like it was repeating what I was saying through a pillow, very muffled. And that remains the only actual evidence I've managed to record. I think it might be one of the murdered children that comes to visit me sometimes, but I can't be sure. I've spoken to Johnny Hauser a couple times as he's in town every now and then at conventions and such, and his experiences as the house's caretaker rival anyone else's in the field. And he's just a hell of a nice guy. 3 a.m. Paranormal will return very soon. And that, dear listener, is episode 6. Short, sweet, and to the point. And as a little added bonus, here's that phantom voice I caught while recording episode 2. And with that, the second episode is complete. It was one of the strangest things I've ever experienced, like someone right next to me talking through a pillow. Visit theghostsignalpodcast.com for updates and merch, and www.patreon.com/theghostsignalpodcast to gain access to exclusive content. A quick thanks to Miss Jamie for the inspiration and enthusiasm. The Ghost Signal is exclusively produced by Jason Wilson, custom sound beds by J.M. Scherf, video editing wizardry by Hale, creative direction by Cassie, and Patreon mastery by Brooks Bigley, and my name is Jeff, your friendly control operator and your ghost host with the most. Next time the Ghost Signal haunts your earbuds is an episode I've wanted to do for months, The Tale of the Bell Witch of Adams, Tennessee. So until then, dear listeners, spirits and specters, ending transmission. Reach me at the ghostsignalpodcast@gmail.com.
This has been a Grey Rooms production. Copyright 2021 and 2022.
The ghost signal is lost. Transmission terminated.